Welcome to the Flight Levels. Flying in the National Airspace System is a wonderful tool. I love the option of choosing whether to use IFR or VFR rules. Depending on the specific conditions along your route of flight, it may be advantageous to use both. Today we are going to explore ways to use both VFR and an IFR clearance on the same flight. Let's get to it. It's no mystery I love the freedom visual flight rules offer pilots. I love being able to choose my route, which is usually direct to my destination. I love being able to choose my altitude to optimize aircraft performance and my personal comfort. Ride conditions not great above 8,000? Let's descend. It's a hot day? Let's climb above 10,000 and cool off in the lower temperatures. On the other hand, I also love that instrument flight rules exist. If the weather conditions are below the regulatory requirements or my own personal minimums for VFR, I'm very happy IFR clearance are easy to obtain. Though, a misconception I see from many pilots is that it's all or nothing on a given flight. What I mean is that many pilots have the incorrect assumption that if an IFR clearance may be required on any portion of the flight, then they should file and receive an IFR clearance for the whole flight. While there is nothing wrong with such a choice, I'm going to make the case for using an IFR clearance just for the portion of your flight that requires an IFR clearance. A common flight for pilots in California is between the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles. Let's say we are planning a flight from Livermore, California to Van Nuys, California. Both are Class Delta airports with parallel runways and a mix of small general aviation planes and larger business jets. In our planning, we find the weather at the time of our departure from Livermore is going to be low ceilings through the morning, which will require an IFR departure. At the same time, we can see it will be VFR the rest of the way once we break through the low clouds at Livermore. Given these circumstances, let's plan to depart IFR, but then cancel IFR as soon as practical. That way, we can have the benefits of VFR the rest of the way to Van Nuys. When filing our route, we can file the Livermore 3 departure, since that is what Livermore gives all IFR departures regardless of direction of flight. Beyond this DP, we can just file direct our destination of Van Nuys. Even though our intentions are to be IFR for a short duration of this flight, we are still going to file as if our intentions are to go IFR the entire route. This means still filing our destination as Van Nuys. We also want to file estimated time on route and true airspeed accurately. Of course, filed altitude needs to be an appropriate IFR altitude for the route of flight. If we are planning on cruising VFR at 9,500, we would just file for 9,000. When receiving our IFR clearance from Livermore ground, there is no need to explain our intentions to the controller. They don't care. For Livermore Tower, you are either departing on an IFR flight plan via the Livermore 3 departure, or you are departing VFR. They care precisely nada about what you do 5 minutes from now. So we pick up our IFR clearance just like any other IFR clearance. We receive our takeoff clearance from the tower. We switch over to departure control. As we are climbing with departure, some pilots immediately cancel IFR at the moment they break out of the clouds. However, let's review cloud clearance requirements for Class Echo airspace below 10,000 feet. In case you forgot, you are required to be 1,000 feet above any clouds. Be sure to note what altitude you broke out of the clouds and only cancel IFR once 1,000 feet above that altitude. Your call to ATC would go something like this. NorCal, Cirrus 341 Whiskey Golf, cancel IFR. I'll stay with you for advisories. You may be wondering how the controller feels about such a call. Are you below the controller's minimum vectoring altitude? Was the controller expecting you to stay on the DP to avoid traffic? Was the controller planning your altitude step-ups based on surrounding traffic? While those may have been the case a moment ago, as soon as you cancel IFR, none of that matters. I would argue a controller's two favorite words are cancel IFR. So long as you are below flight level 180, any air traffic controller will be happy to change your status to VFR. Depending on the radar facility's procedures, you may be assigned a new beacon code. This is done so that minimum safe altitude alert processing is appropriate for VFR versus IFR aircraft. Now that we are VFR, we can turn directly to our destination. We can also climb at our discretion so long as we stay clear of Class Bravo airspace. Class Charlie airspace is not a concern because we are already talking to a radar controller. Short of a direct instruction to avoid Class Charlie airspace, we have already met the requirements for entering Class Charlie airspace by having flight following. Another perk is all of the work establishing flight following is already taken care of because the information on our IFR flight plan is used. As we fly down the Central Valley VFR, we also have the discretion to fly through the military operating areas around Lemoore. If we had stayed IFR, we would have been rerouted west of that airspace. As we get further south toward the Los Angeles area, small GA IFR arrivals into Van Nuys are assigned the Weasel Star and are forced to comply with both the lateral and vertical limitations of that star. While VFR, we have the discretion of both our lateral route as well as our altitude. Once we get closer to Van Nuys, we may receive vectors for sequencing. Now, let's reverse the situation. Let's say back in the planning of the flight from Livermore to Van Nuys, we found the weather in Livermore was great, but there was a layer of fog in the Los Angeles area. We need to have an IFR clearance at some point before we start the approach in Van Nuys. What's the best way to do this? As we saw, beginning IFR and switching to VFR is pretty straightforward. Going the other direction is slightly more complicated. Beginning IFR while already airborne requires two elements. You need to have a controller provide you a clearance. You also need to have filed an IFR flight plan in such a way so the controller in question has all of the information they need to give you the clearance. Let me explain why this can be complicated. In our earlier example, we filed an IFR flight plan from Livermore to Van Nuys. The ATC computer sees our origin airport of Livermore and sends the flight plan information to Livermore Tower, NorCal TRACON, as well as Oakland Air Traffic Control Center. In this example, let's say we want to pick up our IFR clearance in the vicinity of Bakersfield, California, which is roughly where the Weasel Star begins into Van Nuys. When we call up Bakersfield Approach and ask them for an IFR clearance, their response would be, "Who the hell are you? I don't have any flight plan information on you." And for good reason. Why would they? What we need to do is bullshit the system a little bit. We need to file an IFR flight plan from an airport that Bakersfield Approach is going to get a proposal flight plan on. So instead of filing Livermore to Van Nuys with a proposed departure time of when we depart Livermore, we need to file an IFR flight plan from Bakersfield to Van Nuys with a proposed departure time of when we will be passing Bakersfield. This way, the controller who is issuing our IFR clearance has all of the pertinent information from our filed flight plan. But Joe, this is dishonest, and the FAA won't like me filing a flight plan from an airport I'm not departing from. As I like to say as if I were playing Jeopardy, I'll take things the controller doesn't care about for $600, Alex. That's right, nobody cares. There was a time when search and rescue procedures would use the filed departure airport as a source of information, but now with ADS-B, anyone with an internet connection and a pulse can see where you departed from. One thing to keep in mind is when filing your fuel on board. You will need to compute your fuel on board at the point you will be picking up your IFR clearance. You will also still need to comply with FAR 91.167 fuel requirements and FAR 91.169, which covers IFR alternate requirements. Let's go over another situation where this technique is useful. There are some parts of the country where there are several TRACONs in close proximity to each other. Like we've mentioned, when we file an IFR flight plan, the proposal flight plan information is only sent to the tower of the departure airport, if there's a tower, the TRACON, and the Air Route Traffic Control Center, which hosts the TRACON. For example, let's say we plan to do an IFR flight from Pompano Beach, Florida to Melbourne, Florida. We file IFR from Pompano Beach to Melbourne at 6,000 feet. On this particular day, it's VFR at Pompano Beach, so we decide to just depart VFR and pick up the clearance once airborne. When looking for which frequency to call to receive our IFR clearance, we take a look at the chart supplement for Boca Raton, since we'll be essentially beamed that airport when we call. We see Palm Beach approach on 127.35. Great! We dial in that frequency and call Palm Beach approach, Cherokee 983 Juliet Mike, 4 miles west of Boca Raton, request IFR clearance to Melbourne. Cherokee 983 Juliet Mike, Palm Beach approach, Palm Beach altimeter 2989er. I don't have any flight plans on file for that tail number. Are you sure you filed a flight plan? What the heck? How did this happen? We filed a flight plan. The problem is the ATC computer assumes you are picking up your clearance at the origination point of the flight plan. In this case, a flight plan was sent to the tower at Pompano Beach, Miami approach, since that's the TRACON for Pompano Beach, and Miami Center. Palm Beach approach doesn't have any flight plan information on you because they shouldn't. If you plan to depart VFR and pick up an IFR clearance with a facility other than the one designated for your departure airport, you're going to run into this problem. To resolve this, you need to either pick up your clearance on the ground before departing, or you need to file an IFR flight plan that starts at an airport in the vicinity of where you will actually request your IFR clearance. But Joe, I've just asked controllers for pop-up IFR clearances without a problem. Yes, some controllers go out of their way to accommodate pop-up IFR clearances, and I'm appreciative of the times I've received those. However, controllers are sticking their necks out a little bit by providing an IFR clearance when they don't have all of the information contained on those ICAO flight plans. If you crash and there is no record of any contact information or what color your airplane is or how many souls on board, it's likely to be a problem. Let's save pop-up IFR clearances for those few times when we truly did not anticipate a need for an IFR clearance. So back to our flight from Livermore to Van Nuys. With the weather being VFR in Livermore, we can now depart VFR and turn straight towards Van Nuys instead of turning north like we did on the Livermore 3 departure. We can also climb at our discretion rather than being stepped up behind Oakland and Hayward arrivals. We can also fly straight through the Lemoore BOAs rather than going around them. Once we get near Bakersfield, we can call Bakersfield approach and say, Bakersfield approach, Cirrus 341 Whiskey Golf, 10 miles west of Bakersfield, request IFR to Van Nuys. Since you filed a flight plan beginning at Bakersfield, they will have your proposed flight plan available to them. You will then read back the clearance and proceed IFR just like any other IFR flight. In review, we have the amazing freedom to choose between using visual flight rules or instrument flight rules. Even more amazingly, we can choose to switch between the rules to best suit our mission. When canceling IFR, it's as easy as saying, cancel IFR. When initiating a new IFR clearance, be sure you file your flight plan such that the beginning element is in the vicinity of where you will actually start the IFR clearance. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you learned anything. Share this with any of your friends who may also want to learn techniques to be a better pilot in the National Airspace System. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and head over to flight-levels.com. Remember, don't just fly, climb to the flight levels.